Welcome to Under the Skin, Deeyah Khan. You deliberately put yourself in very difficult situations. You famously made documentaries with the Ku Klux Klan, with jihadists, with white extremists. I mean, that would include the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, I think there's no way they would escape categorization under that banner. Why do you do it?
I do it because I'm interested in why people do the things that they do, why people believe the things that they believe. With both those groups of extremes that you're talking about, I think we all understand what they believe. I think we understand a lot about their ideology. We understand how horrible they are, right? But there's always a human being behind all the rhetoric and behind all of the chest beating and the ideology. And I always want to get to that part. And the reason I'm interested in that is not to excuse any of that behavior. It's not to normalize any of it, but it's just to try and get to the beating heart of it. Because if I feel that if we get to the beating heart of it, then maybe we, as the rest of society, maybe we can do a better job at resolving some of this.
So your perspective and your motivation is an optimistic one, that you essentially believe that people that have extremist beliefs, however those beliefs are resourced, whether it's fundamentalism from an Islamic perspective or ethno-nationalism, you think that these are almost temporary fugues that human beings pass through, that they are not essential states, as you said, that you are interested in meeting the human being behind, and you believe that human being is more truthful, more real, better than their group identity in each of these cases.
I do, because what I've found in doing all the films that I've done at this point is the window, I always call it sort of window dressing, or whatever the brand is, that might be different. So on the surface of it, it's going to look different to most people when it comes to a jihadi versus a neo-Nazi. Well, these are completely opposing ideologies, completely different people, and therefore should be treated completely differently. But what I found is that the type of men that are attracted to these movements and the type of vulnerabilities that those men possess that are being preyed upon by people in a position to misuse whatever vulnerabilities that these men have for their own political gains are the same. The psychological, the emotional, the social makeup of the guys across the spectrum, I have found actually to be really, really similar, whether it's, a matter of, searching for meaning, searching for belonging, searching for a sense of purpose, searching for a brotherhood, camaraderie, searching for just a way of coping with a very, quickly changing world, finding themselves to be insignificant, powerless. And then you have recruiters and you have these movements that are filling those voids actively and cynically, actually filling those voids, not by accident, but actually by design. And I find that really troubling, but I also find that quite hopeful. Because I think that these basic human needs, I'm searching and have been searching for all of these things that I've just listed as well. It's just, it manifests itself different for me than it does for these guys. And it's just, for me, it's a matter of figuring out, how do we satisfy these needs for young people? How do we satisfy and address these vulnerabilities that young people have? And also, how do we confront the feelings of shame and humiliation and powerlessness that so many people feel before they become instrumentalized by our politicians and by populism?
So you found, regardless of how superficially polarized the group identities of white supremacists or jihadists may seem, that there's a kind of uniformity.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely, because these movements are meeting these young men, predominantly men. Obviously there are some women.
Do you think that's important?
I do. I think gender is a tremendous part of this. I think a sense of masculinity, or a sense of sort of toxic masculinity, I think is absolutely essential to this, to both movements, or to any kind of extremist movement. And I think that's also systematically overlooked. I think the way that our media addresses extremists, and I think the way that our politicians address extremism in general, I think is not very helpful. They constantly want to make it something exotic, something so impossible and monstrous, because surely we can't do anything about this. These people are just hideous. They possess these hideous views, and let's just sign them all off. And that's not the truth. The truth is they're all operating out of really basic needs. And those needs are not being met in their life, in their immediate family life, or in the wider society. That says more about us as a society than it does about these men. And so I'm interested in that. I'm interested in finding and excavating what those needs are, what those vulnerabilities are. Look, extremists of any kind of stripe and any form flourishes in vacuums. Right? So you have Hamas and Hezbollah and all these kind of, big names that we've heard of. They provide in circumstances and environments where social services do not exist, education does not, does not exist, healthcare does not exist. They are filling those voids. So whether it's political voids, it is economic voids, or it is social and emotional and psychological voids in the lives of people, these extremist groups, whatever their brand is, are fulfilling those, knowing what these lacks and these voids are in people's lives. So why do they know that? Why are they doing that and we are not? Why is our political system not addressing the social and economic and the political grievances that our young people have?
Yes,
it doesn't and again, it doesn't excuse the way that they're choosing to express that.
I think we can say at the beginning that no one's seeking to excuse the behaviour of extremists, but I feel like possibly we have really similar world views based on what you've said to me so far. I'm interested in hearing a little more about your personal experience. When we talk in a sort of a vague way about extremism, it seems abstract. What's it like when you encounter it in an individual? Tell me about some of your experiences, say, for example, with white supremacists and what that's like on a personal level. How did it tally with your expectations, and were you challenged in ways that were surprising? And give me sort of personal examples of it, if you don't mind.
So when I decided to make this film, so I've had experiences of racism most of my life. I mean,
because you're actually a Norwegian person.
I know it doesn't look like
no,
it.
You don't still feel that. So I'm just that's my own inadvertent expectations of a Norwegian person. Right. I don't think that'll be a Muslim person, right, or a dark person. I think blonde,
blue-eyed, exactly. Yes, you can only imagine what it was like to grow up in the sea of the blonde and the blue-eyed, right? Looking like this. So yes, I was born and raised in Norway. My father is Pakistani, my mother is Afghan. Come from a very, very supportive, very liberal, very kind of eccentric home. My earliest memories is of me playing on the carpet and there being cigarette smoke and coffees and teas being drank and conversations about politics and global affairs and human rights being talked about, theater, art, activism being spoken about, which included men and women from the parts of the world that my parents come from. So my very, very early memories was about politics matter, the personal matters. In fact, the personal is the political. And also that men and women both engage in these very complex conversations. My father had a lot of experiences of racism in Norway. So his sort of dream was for his children to make it big and to become famous and to surpass whatever limitations there might be on somebody who looks like this in a country like that, through working harder than everybody else, through becoming more important in some ways than he was able to accomplish in his own life.
Which, from what I understand, is relatively typical of the immigrant experience in some cases.
Yeah. So exactly. So he wanted something better for his children than what he was able to live in his own and experience in his own life. So and I remember him dragging me to these public demonstrations against racism, actually, when I was, the earliest one I remember was about 6 years old, and I mentioned this in the film as well. And I remember also having conversations with him in later years in Norway, and him saying, look, you just have to give it time. This stuff, this hatred that these types of people hold for people like us, it will go away. You just got to be patient. You just got to hang in there, and it'll be okay. And, the fact of the matter is, decades later, I'm still sitting here. We've got Donald Trump. We've got, what's happening in Italy, in France, everywhere. You're seeing this just wave of populism, colored with racism, just overtaking every space that we now know. So the reality is that it's not going away. And you can't just resign it and relegate it to time. We're going to have to play an active role in this. So a couple of years ago, I did an interview with the BBC. I consider it to be a really bland interview with the BBC, where we talked about our multicultural society in the UK and diversity, and how we find our way through that, and how we can find a better way of living together. And in that, I said that parents like mine who've come to Western countries, and for them to think that they can reestablish what they've left behind in these countries is madness. They're going to have to leave the past behind. We're in a different place now, in a different time now, and that's just what it is. Similarly, white people in the countries that our parents have come to are also going to have to leave behind what they expect from their country in terms of what it used to be like immigration. And the reality is, and whatever loss is involved in that, we can address that loss, and we can even, we can even mourn that loss if we need to, which, I understand that there is a loss. I get that. But the reality is we're here now. And so what do? Either we get rid of each other, which to me is not an option that I can tolerate or think makes any sense, or we try to figure out living together, truly living together, truly being in a relationship with each other, and what that means. Anyway, so I did this interview, and one of the sentences that I said is, Britain's never going to be white again, or never going to be only white again. And this sentence and this interview basically went viral. I ended up on so many violent racist websites, particularly in America, saying that I've committed white genocide by saying that, these countries are never going to be white ever again, blah, blah, blah. And the reactions that I got to that, the amount of death threats and the severity of the threats that I got was so intense that the BBC even got in touch with me and said, look, what we're getting for you is very, very dark. There was another hijabi woman actually as well who'd said certain things, but they said, for you, it's even worse. So you actually really need to take this seriously, get the police involved, all this stuff. I was laughing at it at the beginning because I've lived with death threats most of my life anyway. My first half of my life, I got a lot of death threats from Islamic extremists because I'm a woman, and because I say the things that I say publicly, because I do the work that I do publicly, because I speak about women's rights, because I speak about human rights, and I speak about freedom of expression, and all of that, I've lived with death threats from that side of it. And then because I'm a person of color, I also and speak about diversity and unity and how we do this thing together, I also get death threats from white supremacists. So I decided that I choose not to be afraid of these people. I'm going to choose not to follow what it is that they want me to, and choose not to react in a way that they intend for me to react. So rather than running and hiding or hating these people, I'm going to go and see if I can sit with them, meet with them, talk to them, and see, is it possible for you to hate as easily in person as it is to do behind a keyboard, or as it is to do, on the phone? And also, is it possible for me to sit with people like that? People that I've been afraid of most of my life, people that I've also hated most of my life. Can we sit down? Can we recognize each other's humanity? Is that possible? And is it possible for me to hold on to my humanity in the process of doing that? Why are you breathing like that?
So I'm processing all of this information.
Okay.
I think that the thing you said about on that interview, Britain will never be white again, I suppose that's even though it's sort of obviously true because time is irreversible, I suppose what might be resonant and challenging about that is that to some degree or another, people have a relationship with their country, with their nation. These constructs have been put in place, augmented, fortified, reiterated throughout time in order to manage populations.
Absolutely.
And then as the needs of that nation state require immigration, diversification, the population that have been grown on certain myths of what their country is and what their role within that country is have to adapt at a speed that they are not able to.
Agree.
So
I agree.
You voiced
which is why
that.
I'm saying that there is a loss in there that I actually do recognize. And I don't know what we need to do in order to address that loss. I don't know if we need to...
know.
No, I don't know if we need to... Because the thing is, that has to be let go, right? Because it's the past now. It's gone. But we can recognize the loss, and I don't know. Maybe we need to have like a ceremony of letting go of that. I don't know. Whatever that transition needs to be.
Well, I think you're right, but I think it's unlikely that there would be a ceremony because that language doesn't culturally exist for any of us.
Doesn't matter. No, but that doesn't matter
because it doesn't.
Because it's up to us. It doesn't matter if it exists or not. We can still try
I'm
and.
aware of that, but I'm just saying that in a secular culture, the only rituals we have are commodified rituals, like sporting rituals, and
which is part of the reason why we're here.
Yeah, and traditionally, see, I can see how these problems come about because nation is ensconced in tradition, religion ensconced in tradition. There is a kind of nostalgia, an evident nostalgia that's easy to, as you have already stated, cynically inflame in order to maneuver people into extremist positions. Now, like when we're talking about, I obviously admire you tremendously for your willingness, ability, and for the fact that you actually have gone and confronted people and talked about it directly. And perhaps we'll come back to this idea of what a ceremony or ritual of mourning and conciliation would look like. That's so we'll put a pin in that for a moment, how we're essentially going to establish utopia through ritual. Let's move on into how the inciting incident of this conflagratory interview with the BBC led you to want to directly confront people that hated you and that you yourself said you'd hated. Talk to me a little bit about that experience.
So I started obsessively reaching out to white supremacist activists and also groups in America in particular, because that's where I did get in touch with some people in the UK, but in the UK, because of the laws that we have around hate speech and, so it's harder for people here to be open about their views. Whereas in America, because of the First Amendment, most of them are much more comfortable speaking about it out loud. So I thought, okay, well, let me go there. And also most of the vitriol and the threats that I was receiving actually came from America. So let me do that. I would say about 99% of the people that I got in touch with or tried reaching out to, not interested. Most of them ignored me, and the people that did respond to me said, no, thank you. Because I was very open. I said, look, I'm a woman of color. I'm a Muslim. I'm this. This is what's happened, and this is what I'm interested in doing. And I'm actually sincerely interested in listening. I actually want to understand. So I'm going to leave my baggage at the door. Believe it or not, I will really try to do that. And still not interested. One guy wrote back and said, well, yeah, maybe, no, possibly, but yeah, no. And this was Jeff Scoop, and he was the leader of the National Socialist Movement, which is the largest neo-Nazi organization in America. And I was really excited. I thought, okay, well, 1 in a million, so there is a chance, right? So I just started just hounding him and just writing him again and again and again and again. I said, look, give me 5 minutes, give me 10 minutes, give me whatever it is that you can give me. Just let's sit down. You can tell me to piss off, doesn't really matter, but let's just do this. Eventually he agreed. And he said, look, you get 1 hour, you're going to come to Detroit, you're going to come to the whatever motel, and after an hour, you go away. I was like, okay, yay, fabulous, great, I can do that. Went, And of course, just minutes before he's about to walk in, suddenly all this stuff starts rushing through my head of going, my goodness, I'm in America now. These guys are armed. What if he brings weapons with him? What if he brings guys with him? It's just me and a colleague. I can't afford like security and all that kind of stuff. So I was just going, oh, shit, you're doing it now. But what if this just goes horribly wrong? And he shows up and he was alone. He did everything that he said. And we talked for an hour, and then we talked for another 4 hours. And at the end of that, he said, look, we're about to go to this rally in Charlottesville, and you're very welcome to join us.
Sort of quite polite and
very
charming.
Polite. No, really.
Rally.
Really. And I was going, okay, great.
What did you think of him by this stage? Did you like him?
I liked him.
Does it? So
that sounds really counterintuitive, right? Right, for a person like me to sit there and somebody who considers me to be a shitskin and a degenerate and all
Did
kinds
you say
of
stuff like that during the conversation?
No, because he wasn't able to. So what I did do is that I told him all those things. I described myself in those terms because that's how I'd been described by people in the past and also in the threats that I'd received. So I kept using these words about myself just to his face. We sat this far apart from each other. And every time I would use a word like that about myself, he would just squirm and be really uncomfortable. And then I just started laughing and going, look, obviously this isn't the first time that you're hearing words like this. I'm assuming you use words like this. And if you don't, then people around you certainly do. So why are you so uncomfortable? And he just couldn't answer, but he was really uncomfortable. And I said, do you not want me to use language like that? And he's like, no, I don't. And so, so part of that question that I had, is it possible to hate in up close and personal? And face to face, obviously it wasn't possible for him. It is possible for many other people, but it wasn't possible for him.
What does that make you think?
That something else is possible. That also my judgments against people like him, my prejudices, and my kind of very flat caricature that I carry in my mind and my heart about men like that is also incorrect. So it says something about me as well. But and I asked him, I said, look, why have we sat here for 5 hours and just talked? And he said, well, no one's really asked me the kind of questions that you've asked me, and no one's really spoken to me in the way that you've spoken to me. He said, I've done loads and loads of interviews, but I've never, come across somebody like you before. And he said, also, I acknowledge the fact that there's a sincerity in the worldview that you hold. He said, I disagree with it. I disagree with what you feel, which is that the world should be plural and diverse and rich and, unified, all of this. But he said, I respect that you sincerely feel that. And he said, I also respect that you're an activist. He said, our worldview is completely different, but I respect your sincerity. And he said, you believe in something. He said, whereas most of the people that I've spoken to don't believe in anything. They just want to come in here and get a few quotes and then they piss off. And he said, and you're sitting here trying to convince me that we can live together. Oh my God, of course we can live together. Can you imagine it? Can you see it? Can you feel it? So he said, I get that. I will, of course, continue to work against your worldview, but I respect that.
So whilst you, in that moment, experienced an aspect of that man that was probably surprising to both of you in that his prejudices couldn't survive, in your terms, human contact, which for me suggests that there is a deeper truth present in that man. Yeah. That abides by a code that isn't present in the sort of rhetoric of hatred. That's like very appealing to someone like me that believes in the possibility of positive change. What do you think ultimately the impact was? Say, for example, in that case, do you think there was a lasting impression? Do you think that man's perspective was ultimately changed? Do you think that when he uses language that is invective or dark language, that in the future he might think, oh, I had that nice chat with that woman?
I think so. He's still the leader of that group.
Oh, he stayed with the old National Socialists.
He did. He did. So he stayed. We are in contact with each other still. And I'm going to continue being in touch with him.
Do you ever have small talk with him? Like about,
about films, about sex, about,
What do you mean about sex?
Well,
and films, obviously, I'm interested.
So when he said, you can come to Charlottesville, I went to Detroit, and then he was going to drive to Charlottesville, which is a 9-hour drive. So I filmed him and was stuck with him in a car for about 9 hours. And he's, giving me all this. Can I swear?
Yes.
This? Okay. So he's giving me all this kind of his shit, his kind of, talking points, his kind of, usual thing. His talking points, which is incredibly boring.
Right.
Right? You get that. We all know what Nazis believes. It's just I'm not interested. So he's giving me this.
Not for 9 hours.
Not
of
for 9 hours.
supremacy.
Too much. That's too much supremacy. So I just started asking him about other stuff. I started asking him about his family. About does he have children? All this other kind of stuff, and then about sex and.
Well, how do you segue into that?
You just
sex
do.
With a
you just have
Nazi?
to. No, you just have to. And he was absolutely horrified, and he had one of his guys in the car as well, who was very, very offended.
What were you saying about, like monogamy, for example? You're saying, well, do you believe in monogamous relationships?
Doesn't.
Or
No, he doesn't. Yeah, no, we did talk about that. Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, anyway, so we talked about that. Talked about has he ever thought about black women? Has he ever No, I completely had to.
Well, how did that go?
It didn't go that well. That's okay, because I just wanted to break his kind of thing, his spiel, his.
Yeah, see if you can crack the matrix through more primal energies, because however committed one is to sort of racism or any exclusive worldview, there are forces present in the anatomy of individuals
that are beyond that,
beyond and more powerful. I would say
exactly, and very much the case for him as well. And I asked him, several weeks later, I said in our last interview, and I said, look, I feel like I've been like an annoying sister to you and kind of been pestering you and pushing your buttons, and you've sort of allowed me to do that, and you've sort of put up with me and been actually really patient. How do you feel about that? And he goes, well, and I said, I'm calling you, I'm saying that, I've been like a sister to you. How does that feel? He's like, well, that's, well, it's kind of sweet. And I said, okay, anything else? You want to, do you feel like that too? Do you feel like, an irritated brother? Nothing.
So you think he fancies you a little bit?
No. I think he does consider me to be an irritating sister. But I also recognize the fact that he can't really say that out loud, and he can't say it on camera. But I absolutely get along with him, and I don't want to ruin his. I realize this is a public thing. I don't want to ruin his kind of public.
His mystique as a Nazi.
Yeah. But I like him.
You don't want to undermine his Nazi-ness. He don't want to undermine your woman of colour identity. The two of you are protecting each other in this ridiculous tryst.
The thing is, I like him. He's actually
so when you
a
cut
decent
the film,
guy.
Do you cut him to? I've seen bits of it. Do you cut it to make him look good? Do you think, because like say that your editorial requirements are to be honest, or to make a sort of a sensational and interesting film?
No, so I have no requirements, because I just do what's important to me, and then ITV is who ends up taking the films. They sort of just take it for what it is. And in terms the way that he was cut, because I've shown it to him, and I've done this with every film that I've done. I always show it to people after the fact to make sure that they feel that they've been represented accurately. And his comment was he thinks it's too short. Right. He thinks the film should have been too long.
He was in that car 9 hours banging on about mountain people.
No, and that wasn't even included in the film. Because there's only so much you can include. But anyway, but he and also a lot of the other guys that I met with did feel that they'd been represented accurately, and that actually means a lot to me, because regardless of the fact that I disagree with them and find their worldview and their politics to be disgusting, still doesn't mean that I need to respect their need to be represented fairly.
Yeah, your own integrity.
Exactly.
I can see is
exactly
important.
And so he felt that was accomplished.
That's good.
Yeah.
What about didn't one lad say, I don't want to be a Nazi anymore, you've put me off it?
Yeah. So actually, one of them who's been in the White Power movement for over a decade, Brian Culpepper is his name. When I was editing the film, he called me up and he said, look, I've decided to leave. I haven't even told commander. They say they have like a military structure to their hierarchy, to their organization. He said, I haven't even told commander, which is Jeff. Yet.
Sounds more important when you say it's a commander. When you say it's Jeff,
I know.
Something you just send in a text.
Exactly. And he said, I haven't even told him yet, but, I wanted you to know, and this is what's happening. So I actually included that in the film. And he didn't leave because of our interactions completely, but it was part of the reason. And he was very clear about the fact that was a part of the reason. And he witnessed me being treated very, very badly by some of the people. What happened? Well, a lot of very difficult encounters happened, but one of the things that he was present at, I remember going to a compound in the mountains of Virginia, where there were about 75 guys from different neo-Nazi groups after Charlottesville, actually, and they were bruised and, had a lot of weapons. Weapons that are kind of military-grade weapons. Very angry, very kind of riled up, very drunk. And I remember going there with Brian, and Brian said, it's fine, you can film there, bring your camera, it's fine. Some of them have agreed to do some interviews, it's perfectly fine. And I remember my colleague, it was just the two of us, one of my colleagues, he goes, just leave the camera, let's go down, let's have a look first. If it's fine, we'll come back, get the camera, and then it's fine. I was like, no, he says it's cool, it's okay. He's like, no, just trust me, just leave it. And we start walking down this dirt road, and they start gathering and start shouting, who the fuck are you? Okay, I can't say that. Okay, who the fuck are you? Are you the fucking media? Are you fucking Jew? Are you fucking this? And I was going on, and they're picking up their massive like weapons, and I just have to put our hands up and go, no, he said it's okay. I'm with him, which didn't really matter at the time. Calm down, rah, 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 rah. And they keep shouting and getting right in my face, blowing cigarette in my face. The fuck are you? Are you this? What kind of fucking Muslim are you? Are you fucking Shia? Are you Sunni? Are you this? Blah, blah, blah. Why isn't your head covered if you're a fucking Muslim? Rah, rah, rah. And I remember just thinking, and I'm looking at my phone. That's the only thing I had. And I remember it saying, no signal. And I remember thinking, if they want to, they can put a bullet in my head and they can just put me in the ground right here. And nobody would know, because I hadn't told any of my colleagues back in London that I was filming or doing any of this. And I just remember if I make it out of here, just let me make it out of here alive. And eventually did. And I remember going back to the motel and contacting my colleague back in London and going, look, this is what I'm doing. Here's the number for my mother. Here's the number for my brother. If anything happens to me, if you don't hear from me every 2 days, then you just contact them and tell them something's happened. But Brian witnessed this, and he also witnessed other encounters like that. And he felt that we'd become friends. As well, because I was respectful to him, he was always respectful to me, and we were in Charlottesville together. I was pepper sprayed by counter-protesters, which is bizarre, because
counter-protesters,
anti-fascist protesters, which I've gone to so many Nazi protests, through my life, and I'm always on that side, so I'm kind of looking at people going, I'm on your side. I'm just filming these guys. Don't, and of course you get pepper sprayed.
That's ironic.
Isn't it?
After you've gone to all this trouble, it's the anti-fascists that end up...
That actually get you. I know. And then Brian, so when he called me, he said, look, I've got to tell you something. And then he said, look, I've decided to leave. I can no longer deal with this. It doesn't make any sense to me anymore. And I said, why doesn't it make any sense? And also in the course of the film, I'd asked him, because, all these guys keep talking about a white ethno-state. That's what they're going to establish. And in that white ethno-state, and we talked about this a lot, that means people like me are not welcome. And I said, well, would you be willing to deport somebody like me? Would you be willing to deport me? And he really struggled with it at the time. And then he eventually said, well, yes, I would have to do that. And so when he left, I said, look, so why have you left? And why is this difficult for you to reconcile now? And he said, well, because we've become friends. And I said, and why does that matter? And he said, well, it's I care about you, and you care about me, and he said, I've never spoken to a Muslim before you. He feels very strongly about Muslims, but he's never actually met anyone before.
He likes 100% of the Muslims he's met.
Exactly, he does. And he goes, you're the first one I've met, and now I'm interested in meeting more people who are different from me. And he said, so I've decided to leave. And he said, and I didn't like how you were treated. And I also asked him, would you deport me now? And he said, no, I couldn't. And why not? Well, because you're my friend.
So these experiences, Deeyah, have in a way confirmed your intuitive belief that fascism or extremism will not withstand human contact. Human connection.
Yeah. So it will not. But I don't want to...
You feel it's kind of like an illusion. It's a temporal state. It's like a virus of the mind. It's something that there is an antidote to it. And that antidote is love and connection. Sounds like a kind of hippie thing, but it's in
true.
A way...
It's true. And it does sound like a hippie thing, but this film proves that. Another man in the film, he wears a massive swastika on his chest. And I met him at Charlottesville as well. And he's very angry, very aggressive. He has harassed his local mosque for ages. And when I filmed with him, he was throwing out anti-Jewish flyers in his neighborhood in Florida as well. And, he's an ex-military guy, and he joined the military because he hates Muslims, basically. So he thought that was a great way of addressing that. There are foreign policies that are somewhat in alignment with this hatred I'm feeling. Exactly. So he felt that that's how I can express. And we spent a lot of time together as well. And he ended up using the same word. I consider you to be a friend. May I ask? And he left. He's left. You're ruining the Nazis. You're diminishing them one by one. What do you think is... But it's possible. Of course, I agree with you. In order to belong to services, whether that's, the army, I kind of feel like it's brave to join the army. I can't get beyond that. But national identity has certain ingredients which you are saying are exploitable. It's exploitable, but also I think most of these men who have served return broken, right, traumatized, and also feel that they've been betrayed by the country that they served. They feel that they were sold a lie. And so some of the men that I talk to are actually very, very anti-America. Yeah. Bizarrely, even though they're part of these kind of nationalist, ethno-nationalist groups. Interesting. It is really interesting. They would like to see the American flag burned. They would like to see the American system and politics dismantled because it is completely perpetuating a lie and asking for the lives of poor and working class Americans for nothing true, nothing real, nothing meaningful in return. And also, the military breaks you down and then, rebuilds you and asks for your absolute loyalty in return for order, in return for certainty, in return for significance, in return for brotherhood and camaraderie and a greater purpose in life. So when they leave all of that, they still need that. And a lot of these groups, as I said earlier, the National Socialist movement is actually structured around a military hierarchy. So their group, for example, is attracting a lot of ex-military guys because they are able to satisfy a lot of those needs that these men are now searching for. This sounds maybe a little bit strange, but in England, how a lot of the press, when they talk about young Muslims returning from Syria, they keep talking about returnees and how dangerous they are. Yes. And they've seen bad things, they've done bad things, and so what does that mean for when they come back? I completely understand a lot of those concerns. But at the same time, we have military guys who have also seen bad things, who've done bad things, who are trained for certain purpose, coming back to the UK with no real support, no economic infrastructure around them, no way of reintegrating them into society, no way of making their lives purposeful and meaningful and productive in civilian life. Those returnees we don't speak about. And the danger of those returnees we don't speak about. And I'm not saying that ex-military men are inherently dangerous, but what makes them dangerous is their sense of alienation, their anger and their resentment at their own government that these extremist groups are preying on and are actively recruiting.
Yes.
And using for training for this ultimate upcoming race war.
Oh, the old race war.
Exactly.
There's an upcoming race war,
exactly.
Is there? Oh, great.
Oh, great. Yeah, didn't you get the memo?
I didn't. I was nervous on sports day. I mean, I don't know how I'm going to cope with a race war. Now, but you have not focused your ire and insatiable lust for death threats solely on the white supremacist community. You also have examined jihadists and extremists from Islamic background. Yeah. So can I ask you a little bit, for like in the UK at the moment, was sort of it seems perhaps the apex in the conflicts between, let's call it, the white working class and ethno-nationalist movements and Muslim immigrant population is the sort of grooming gangs, Tommy Robinson, the subjudicial imprisonment of Tommy Robinson, and the sort of concerns that people have around Muslim or Asian grooming gangs. What's your opinion on that?
My opinion on that is that these are real and difficult and ugly parts of what it means to live together. You know, when a lot of different people from all kinds of different parts of the world have sort of been shoved together on this island, us trying to make that work is really, really hard. And there are ugly sides of that, and there are really beautiful sides of that. And the grooming gangs, for example, is one example of the ugliness of that. And also how the girls who were working class, who were completely ignored and not believed by the authorities, is something really important, worth looking at. But what I think about this is the fact that the extreme right is pouncing on these issues, I think is really telling of the fact that the rest of us are not really taking up these issues and having these incredibly uncomfortable conversations of what it means to live together, of what it means to have these various complex and unpleasant views within our communities. So I think if we are not open and honest about the fact that, you know, plural, diverse, multicultural societies have their dark side as well, right? There are really difficult aspects. You know, honor killings do happen, so-called honor killings, whatever you want to call it. You know, forced marriages, you know, female genital mutilation does happen. Grooming gangs do exist. A lot of this does actually happen. Our unwillingness on the left, and I consider myself to be a part of the left, our unwillingness to want to confront that and want to look at that leaves the playing field open for the extreme right to manipulate and to make use of those stories for their political gain.
So how would you suggest that the people that don't belong to the extreme right approach specifically that issue?
Be honest and admit that it's happening. But the thing is, our intentions on the left are, we actually want to make this work. But I think the mistake that the left often makes is that the left often looks at minority communities as only victims, as only victimized. And we're so afraid of racism that we think that, well, because this great big evil of racism exists, means that there is no oppression, and even if there is oppression, let's just sort of pretend like it's not there, that exists within minority communities as well. You know, I mean, the thing is, minority communities are no different than the majority population. There are wonderful people. There are incredibly difficult, violent, horrible people that exist in any community. So in a way, I find that sort of a racist view as well. Yeah. This kind of, you know, view of, well, no, you're just sort of pathetic victims of your own sort of cultures and your own sort of thing. You can't really help it, can you? You brown, black people. Right? So I find that on the left. And then on the right, the intention, however, is to use these issues that are really unpleasant as a way to divide us. So we have to take those conversations back, and we have to be open and honest about these conversations because we want to live together.
Deeyah.
Sorry.
Do you think that...
Coffee. You shouldn't have given me coffee.
That's part of the problem. Deeyah, do you think that the liberal progressive ideology, the liberal progressive mainstream, have failed in addressing these issues, partly because there is no solid intention to create a fairer society, that in fact it's a kind of insipid movement in the main. I'm not talking about, individuals that are sort of activists and are directly involved in social justice or whatever less sort of tainted term you would use. But I feel that for the last 20 or 30 years, working class people, regardless of colour, but it seems that the rise of ethno-nationalism would suggest that white people, perhaps in particular, have felt left behind and let down by the parties that were established to support their rights and needs. The Labour Party in this country, the Democrats in America, and the same way as the neglect or unwillingness to address sort of extreme, unpleasant criminal abuse issues such as the grooming gangs has led to that territory being claimed by the right, a failure to address the economic needs of the majority of people, the very people who lay down their lives or whose families laid down their lives to establish these nation states, who were required economically for since the Industrial Revolution, who are no longer required and are now being discarded. Does a lot of the blame for the rise of the right lay in the hands of progressive people?
Yeah.
It does, huh?
I'm really sorry to say I think so, because I think if we hadn't let down our sort of natural constituency, which is the working class, which is the poor, which is the disenfranchised, the people on the margins, the people who are struggling to kind of hang on to a dignified life. I feel like we've handed those people over to the Trumps of the world. We've handed those people over to the Nigel Farages of the world, and I think that's on us rather than on the people. The deplorables and whatever, all these kind of terms that people have been using about this group of people, I think is actually disgusting, and I think it's counterproductive. I think the economic, social and political grievances that a lot of people have within the poor and the working class communities, both in this country and also in America, are absolutely legitimate. And I think the fears and insecurities and the growing inequalities that are absolutely apparent, I think, we on the left and on the progressive side are not addressing. Globalization, the way our economic systems are structured are detrimental to a lot of people. They're only benefiting a very, very tiny group of people in our societies. And unfortunately, groups like this are completely, their feelings are legitimate. Their sense of alienation and grievances absolutely, and vulnerability and insecurity is absolutely legitimate. But the way that they're choosing to sort of express those grievances and to make an other and place all the blame on Muslims, on immigrants, and on all these other people, as opposed to on the system that is absolutely underpinning those inequalities, I think is a great shame. So and that's our, I think, failure.
So what you would agree that the feelings are legitimate, but the targets are erroneous.
Yeah, and this is the conversation, going back to good old Jeff again. Good old Jeff, the conversation, the commander, exactly. The conversation, the reason that we spoke for 5 hours instead of 1 hour was that we kept talking about this, and I kept saying to him, look, can you see that the immigrant man or the Muslim man that you believe is your enemy, can you understand that he's actually in the same boat as you? Do you understand that the low wages, that the terrible working conditions, that the lack of rights, workers' rights, the lack of a dignified or the prospects of a dignified life, he is robbed of just as much as you? The fault doesn't lie with that guy. The fault lies with another white guy, or the symbol of another white guy, which is Donald Trump. You have more in common with the immigrant man.
I'm not Jeff. You don't have to convince me.
No.
I'm a nice lad from Essex. Now, listen,
and he agreed.
How could he not? Now, Deeyah, what do you think it's a coincidence that the potentially the most mobile and potentially aggressive aspects of our domestic community, you could say sort of like far right extremists or white nationalists, white working class movements, and Muslim communities and that sort of the young men. At the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about how sort of young Muslim men are attracted to sort of violent groups that are like violent groups, and white working class men are attracted to white violent groups. Do you think it's a coincidence that these two groups have very similar feelings, very similar grievances, are behaving in similar ways, find that their anger and rage is directed at one another, when you just said that the systems that underwrite the problem actually benefits from that polarity and sort of tribal adversity?
I think on the surface it seems like these groups are opposed to each other, but the reality is, as much as there is this sort of co-radicalization happening between groups like that, I think their real enemy is actually not each other. No. Their enemy on both sides is actually people like us. People who want to get along, people who want to live together, people who want to actually make this work. I think that's the real enemy. And that's why you're seeing people like me targeted, people who are trying to articulate and also trying to sort of practice the fact that we are in this together. We don't have a choice but to make this work. This all belongs to all of us, the good and the bad, and we have to sort of figure out a way to make that work. I think those types of people are the enemy. ISIS, Daesh, whatever, they even had this, article come out talking about the gray zone, how the gray zone is sort of their absolute target, and the gray zone is the people in between. They need the far right. They need Trump. That's a fantastic recruitment tool for them, and vice versa, right? But when Brian Culpepper or Ken Parker meets a Muslim who looks like me and who behaves in the way that I behaved with these guys, with empathy and with a willingness to listen and a willingness to really, really understand, that breaks with all the stories that they've been telling themselves of the other, of we are on opposite ends of a spectrum, this is a clash of civilizations, and actually really it isn't. So they need each other. They're mutually beneficial for each other. Their movements depend on each other, but their actual target, therefore, is actually not each other. It's us.
Yes.
Which is why we must resist.
The extremists are on in the Islamic world are evident and obvious. The extremists in ethno-nationalism, we know them by their torches and their marches. Yeah. But for me, I'm interested in power and where power lies and who benefits from the situation staying as it is. And as you just said, like the sort of extreme Muslim groups need Trump, and Trump needs extreme Muslim groups. They benefit one another. But we live in a time where sort of I feel that power is concealed, and that a political situation that is becoming more polarized suits the powerful. It means that they can continue to operate unimpeded. Can you envisage, through the films that you've made, through the kind of work that you do, that sort of seemingly ingrained prejudices can be challenged, undone? You've seen it happen on an individual basis. Do you think it can happen more broadly?
I think so. I mean, I think if the films prove anything, and mind you, this is not necessarily a view that I had before I started the films. I was actually quite pessimistic when I started the films. I thought that, it's people like these are just monsters, and it is what it is, and we're just going to have to accept that a certain portion of our populations are like that, and let's just move along and concentrate on the rest. In the process of making the films, I've come to realize that human connection is absolutely necessary, and that hope is possible, change is possible, and I mean, this word hope is very important to me. I think it's something that I always look for in all the films that I make. I'm not interested in just telling horror stories. I'm not interested in only shining a light on the problems that we have. I also want to look at potential for solutions. And sort of where hope resides, hope to me is power. And the reason I say that hope is power is anytime any system or any leader or tyrant or abuser wants to break us as individuals or as a group of people, the thing that they want to do away with is hope. Because once you rob a person or a people of hope, then any kind of desire to resist, any kind of desire to change things and to dream of something better, something else, goes away. So therefore, to me, hope is power. Hope, therefore, is an act of defiance. Hope is an act of resistance. And I've seen it up close and personal. With human connection, I do see these glimmers of hope in a lot of these people, that something else is possible if we are willing to engage with each other. It's very easy to condemn people like this, whether it be, the Muslim extremists or the, ethno-nationalists. It's very easy to sort of pat ourselves on the back and feel very self-righteous about excluding people like that and patting ourselves on the back for having all the right opinions and having all the correct politics. But these groups thrive on accepting people who are broken, who are fucked up, who are messed up, who are making mistakes, who are looking for something. And so I feel that we can't fall into that trap of excluding. I think we have to become more accepting of people and be willing to build human connections. And yes, it's on an individual basis, but we all can do a little bit, and it does matter. It really does matter. The tiniest acts of kindness actually mean something to people.
So in the end, what you refer to are kind of spiritual principles, or that would more latterly be termed humanistic principles, kindness, being a nice person, etc. What is your own relationship with Islam? What is it? You identify as a Muslim woman. I've seen you on interviews and stuff. What do you mean by that? And can you perhaps explain to me your perspective on terms like moderate Muslim, extreme Muslim? Like, who sets where these lines are drawn between moderate and extreme?
I don't know who sets the lines. I mean, at the moment it seems like the media, the kind of this big term media seems to define that. I mean, I think, look, there is tremendous amount of diversity that exists within the Islamic world.
Because it's 1.5 billion.
Yeah, even a bit more than that. And it's it's Islam, the way that it is practiced, the way that it is manifest itself in our day-to-day life, the way it's lived and experienced, is as diverse as there are Muslims. Right? So there is no one way. And I think what Western people or people who don't know Muslims very well, the trap that I see, walking into time and time again, is the trap that extremists try to set as well, which is to try and say that there is only one Islam, there is only one way of expressing your religiosity or your spirituality. And it is bound by these very, very rigid, very, very harsh lines. And the reality is, your average Muslim doesn't fall into any of that. So it's, people have said to me when I did the jihad film, they said, "Oh, you're just trying to excuse jihadis. You're just trying to, normalize their violence and their viciousness and their this, that, and the other." And I keep saying to people, why are you only looking at the emotional and the psychological reasons and the social reasons why people do this? Why aren't you addressing the fact that actually the problem is Islam? It's nothing else. It's just Islam. And my answer to that is, if Islam was the only problem, there's 1.56 billion Muslims walking around this planet. If the only qualification you need to have to be a terrorist is to be a Muslim, none of us would survive. We'd all be dead by now because we'd all be blown up.
Do you think that there's an attempt to establish a kind of idea of what Islam should be, even in the eyes of people that wouldn't present themselves as being radical or particularly prejudiced, i.e. you are a good version, you're not wearing a scarf, you're not being particularly sort of, you're not talking in Arabic, even for moderate people, whereas like then as it creeps along this presumed scale, you get people that wear sort of a religious dress, and then at the far end of it there's people like in your documentaries that are saying burn the atheists. Like this scale, is this a real scale? Is it helpful? So speak to me. Why do you dress in Western clothes, and do you and what can we read into men and women who do choose to wear religious dress as a marker of? I don't know. Do you think that's something we can use as a sort of a test, a visual test?
I don't think so. I think it's a bit frustrating. It's frustrating that the marker of someone's spirituality or kind of inner life is judged by a piece of cloth or the length of your beard. You know, you wear a beard now too. You know, so it's you know, I think the diversity that exists amongst Muslim people is vast, and I think to try to pigeonhole it or to try to simplify it and to try to flatten it into one thing or one spectrum, I think does a disservice to Muslims, and it does a disservice to the people who are looking at Muslims. I mean, I think what we need is, just like white people or non-Muslims are wonderful and horrible in their entire spectrum of what it means to be a human being, Muslims are just like that. Whether you wear a scarf or you don't, whether you're a Hasidic Jew or you're a you know, whatever, you're Bill Maher or whoever all these other, you know, people are. It's why we're not allowing Muslims to have this incredible wide
you're right.
spectrum of what it means to be a Muslim.
Do you think me saying to you, why don't you wear a scarf, is the same as you saying to me, why don't you wear a suit? Is it a question that should be no more loaded than that? Like, why am I not choosing to wear the uniform of a...
I think it's loaded in the sense that if you think, or if other, you know, people think that because I'm a Muslim woman, I need to be wearing a scarf, that means that the fundamentalists and the extremists have actually gained more ground than people like me and the vast majority of Muslims, because it means that they're getting to set the premise, they're getting to set the definitions, they are getting more airtime than people like the rest of us. They're getting to define what those boxes and those categories are.
That is a trend in media, that really the extremes do get more airtime because it's more interesting, it's more dramatic, and media requires drama. But do you think that that in general British Muslims don't care whether or not women wear religious dress? The
majority don't.
Right.
The majority actually don't. Some I mean, I come from one family. I mean, just let's look at only my father's family. He's incredibly eccentric, incredibly liberal, bit of a hippie, bit weird. Then his father was, you know, one of the most religious people in Norway. He helped build several of the mosques there. My father, you know, so there were protests when the Rushdie affair happened. My grandfather was in the protest that burned the book, that were anti-Rushdie, and then my father was in the tiny march that was, you know, in favor of, you know, people getting to say whatever they want to say, whether they agree with Rushdie or not, but, you know, the freedom of expression. So just in one family, that spectrum of diversity exists. So if we
Did that cause problems for them? That disagreement? They just, when they got home, they travelled to the march together. You go to your bit, I go to my bit.
No, but look, it's what I don't understand is why Muslims are being made into something special or something different from the rest of the population. You have Americans who are Democrats, and in the same family you might have an uncle or a grandmother or a mother who voted for Trump. Similarly, in England, you've got, you know, incredibly progressive, very, very liberal, you know, British people, and then some of their family members, you know, voted for Brexit. So why that is so weird when it comes to Muslims, it doesn't make any sense. We have to allow Muslims the same spectrum of what it means to be a human being and what it means to have a variety of political and social and religious manifestations.
Thank you for explaining that so well. James Baldwin would say, of course, that the sort of the dominant culture needs to establish a sort of a shadow identity in order to designate their own unconscious flaws. So in the case of James Baldwin, he was talking about the creation of the category of Negro in order that the white population would have a depository for their own, inverted commas, darkness, ugliness, toil, sexuality. And if you look at the characterization of the other, frequently those traits are the ones that are attributed to it. So I would say, I mean, and this is as a white English person, that it seems that there is a necessity to create and decorate the other in order to maintain a degree of, if not stability, manageability within the sort of your core population. And I think the problems we're experiencing now is the last 20 or 30 years, the neoliberal project abandoned the economic issues in favour for in my opinion, somewhat superficial identity politics. I'm sure it doesn't feel superficial if you've been granted, the right to get married if you previously didn't have that right, or the, what other, I'm not sort of being dismissive of civil rights, obviously hugely important issue, but the abandonment of an economic underclass, I think, is unforgivable, and has led to the conditions that we're currently experiencing.
It is unforgivable. It is absolutely ugly, and it is why we're seeing this wave of populism wash across Europe, wash across America. And I think absolutely there is truth to what you're saying, and what James Baldwin said as well, which is there is this need, if we as a society and we as individuals are unwilling to look at and confront our own darkness, which is hard. It's and you know this, I know this, it's difficult to accept your own flaws and to look at your own ugliness and to really grapple with that, and also to forgive yourself for that, right? It's hard, but so it's much easier to take all of that and bundle it and sort of push it onto somebody else and say, well, actually, no, you're like that. I'm not like that. I'm glorious. I'm fine. I'm this, I'm that. I'm disenfranchised. I'm alienated. But really all the ugliness, that's your bag. I designate that to you. So it's expedient. It's politically convenient. I think it is also emotionally easier to do that rather than to look at yourself. But I think we're doing that with, Muslims are kind of the latest, boogeyman. That's just the latest villain and enemy that we've crafted. And tomorrow it'll be something else. In the past, it was the Russians.
Yes. On a geopolitical level, you're quite right that sort of the Cold War was sort of a necessary form of control and evidently a political reality for sort of 30 years.
But it's false, though.
In a sense, but the sort of, in a way, the cultural collision between the Christian world and the Islamic world there's some like real history of conquest and conflict.
There is, but the reality was destruction. The reality was bloodshed. The reality, but also beauty. When cultures come together, of course there is, there's a conflict, but very often there's also a merger of ideas, a merger of cultures and thoughts and ideas and progress that then is also possible as a result of it. I think where we stand right now, I keep saying this, we have to find a way to live together. And I think despite all of these dynamics, it's about, our politicians keep using words like integration, what's the other thing that they all keep saying? Assimilation, like all this kind of stuff. To me, all of this comes down to human relationships.
Yeah, it does. It does ultimately. Everything's passing through the psyche of individual human beings. That's quite true. Now, but if we are to live together, my sense is, I'm just making this up as I go along, that the extremists aren't going to be the problem. It's the
rest of us
that's going to be the challenge.
Yes, and I think because our political leaderships have been impotent when it comes to articulating a vision of the future that includes all of us, where we are willing to confront the economic, the political, the social alienation that so many people face, and also the answers and the solutions to some of that. You look at austerity policies, which has been absolutely devastating to the vast majority of people in this country, immigrant or white or whatever. So I think because they've been so terrible at figuring out how we do this, I think it's down to the rest of us. The truth is, it's difficult to have relationships. It's difficult to have relationships with people that you like, and people that you want to be in a relationship with. Even that's difficult. So, but the difference is, and on a societal level, we've all been sort of thrust together and expected to figure out how to do this. There's no support, there's no conversation, there's no nothing there to help us figure this out. You have huge populations of people thrust into rural towns and various places, and integrate? Why don't you figure it out? If you're a brown person, you're not being English enough, you're not learning the language enough, you're not this, you're not that. If you're a white working class person, oh my God, you're just a racist, you don't like these refugees. But the reality is, no one's articulated the fact that we're in this relationship together, and we're going to have to commit to each other, because that's the difference in relationships that you have in your personal life. You've made a commitment to make it work, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when it is unpleasant. You've made a commitment to make it work. On a larger scale, we've not made a commitment to each other between different communities to make it work. So we have to.
You're quite right, I agree with you. I wonder sometimes if it's because we're being asked to make commitments on a scale that's impossible for human beings. I mean this anthropologically. If it is challenging for a group of 75 people to organise their resources fairly, how can groups of 60 million or 300 million organise their resources fairly? When we talk about this ideal of yours, which only a fool would disagree with, of us coming together, living together harmoniously, when I think about what the obstacles are, I less and less think, it's people with torches or flags ranting on the periphery, and more the genuine powers at the heart of our culture, which are imperial, economic, capitalist powers, who require, as we've touched upon numerous times throughout our conversation, polarity of ordinary people, regardless of background or colour, in order to maintain their own power structures. Yeah. So, in a sense, my sort of giddy, personal, radical, wet dream is to somehow unify radical Muslim extremists, ethno-nationalists, and to recalibrate and refocus their attention on the truly powerful. When I have conversations, and I'm taking a leaf from your book, I'm going to be having conversations from people like with more extreme nationalist views. Yeah. Like the kind of conversations that I'm gonna find myself having, and I'd in a sense, I'm asking you this more for research than anything else. When they say no, it is like Asian grooming gangs is particular to Islam. This is especially and particularly a Muslim problem. How will I counter that argument? I mean, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is, no, there's paedophiles everywhere, and there's paedophile gangs in the aristocracy, in the media. That's the first thing I'm going to say. But is there anything else?
Well, you don't even have to go that far. You don't even have to go to the aristocracy. You can just look at, the English Defence League itself has had several. I mean, even as recent as a couple of weeks ago, a man was convicted, I think, for 17 years or something like that, in the kind of higher realms of the EDL, for having abused, I think, a 9 or a 10-year-old girl for a really, really long time. So to me, I mean, this is kind of a different conversation. Misogyny, and when it comes to the abuse of women, and male abuse of power and male violence is something that is not the monopoly of Muslim men. That's not to say that Muslim men are free of that and we should excuse and pardon that and they're just victims of the system or anything like that. They're absolutely responsible for that. But misogyny is something that is absolutely prevalent throughout our societies. I come from Norway. Even Norway, when it comes to violence against women, it is excruciatingly high when it comes to that, and it comes to women who are losing their lives at the hands of their white partners. So if you can point me to a country where violence against women and children doesn't exist, I'd be very happy to plant a flag and clap and say, look, here's the example. These people have managed to really get rid of it. It is something that is endemic, absolutely everywhere. Doesn't excuse that Muslim men or men of color are engaging in it, but it's something that Brian Culpepper, the neo-Nazi in America who's now left, he kept looking at me saying, grooming gangs, and I wanted to tear my hair out and his for saying that, because I kept...
Presumably he was a skinhead.
No, actually, he hadn't shaved his head. I don't know why. But, he kept going on about this, and he kept going, look at you English people, and you're doing this, and you're letting these Muslims getting away with this, and blah, blah, blah. And I kept going, look, if you care about Muslim women or women's rights as much as you claim to, there are thousands of women in America who are being destroyed and exterminated by white American or any kind of men in your country, why are you so obsessive about the Muslim men? If you cared about women's rights, you would be dealing with women's rights and violence against women on the wider spectrum, the entire spectrum. I work personally on violence against women and on women's rights issues in the rest of my life, basically, other than making films. That's a huge, huge passion for me.
Oh.
To me, I work against any man, any group that is inflicting violence on women and children. I don't care if you're white. I don't care if you're Muslim. I don't care if you're Jewish. I don't care if you're a Catholic priest. You need to be held to account. And the woman and the child who is on the receiving end of it, their rights need to be absolutely protected and their voices need to be absolutely believed. So I don't make a distinction. Why do you only care when the perpetrator is the other man? And similarly, you see in the Muslim side of things as well, you'll see a lot of Muslim men who will be saying, look at white American soldiers who are raping our women in Afghanistan, who are raping our women in Iraq. And you sort of go, when rape happens by a white man, you suddenly are a women's rights activist.
I understand.
Suddenly you care.
I understand. So it's sort of like a confirmation bias on either side. Yeah. It's a convenient way of validating existing prejudice by pointing to truly horrific transgressions and using them to bolster a pre-existing ideology of hatred. So
somehow your violence is okay because the other guy does it too.
But yes, or that their violence is worse. And also at an international level, types of violence are considered necessary, types of violence are considered rational, expedient, whereas other types of violence are wacky, religious, crazy.
It just depends on which side of the equation you're on, yes.
Do you believe in God?
Yeah. I believe in love. Yeah. So I use the word love even more than I use the word God.
Why?
Because to me that's what it actually means.
Because it means a kind of a unity of purpose and a sort of benevolent oneness.
Yeah.
How do you think that these ideas can be popularized? And do you think that these ideas can be politicized and potent?
They are. They already are. And how do you popularize it? I think the fact that somebody like you does this, and I think that somebody like you, I said this to you when I walked in as well, you don't have to do this. You can very comfortably do whatever it is that you do and be, comfortable, deal with your own kind of, spirituality and your own practice, and that's fine. And your way of accomplishing change in the world is just by you yourself appearing in the world in the kind of best sort of manifestation of yourself as you can, and that in itself is changing the world, right? But you're choosing to go beyond that. You're choosing to speak about issues that are difficult to speak about. You're choosing to engage with people who are difficult to engage with. You're choosing to ask questions that are uncomfortable and unpleasant, but necessary. So I think how we move the conversation forward is everyone doing their version of that, if they can. At the same time, I don't believe that we should sort of pressurize people or make people feel guilty or burdened by, you have to do this, otherwise we're all screwed. It's people contribute in the way that they can contribute. And if you just smile to a person, if you don't clutch on to your purse when a young Somali boy walks onto the bus, and instead look at him and actually acknowledge him and nod and smile, that in itself is you've changed the dynamic in the world a little bit. So I think people underestimate the individual responsibility and the individual acts of kindness.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you not
They do.
Well, partly I would say that we live in a time that places so much responsibility. Thanks for those lovely things you said about me, by the way. That replaces too much responsibility on the individual. That we are told that, I guess we are given these roles in life as consumers. We're operating within quite narrow parameters. I think what you said about hope is very important, that a lot of people just don't believe that change is possible. And when I think about why I continue to engage in conversation, I have and what we were talking about prior to our recorded conversation, I have, as you clearly do, a belief in the optimum that there is an ulterior reality that's trying to realize itself through the consciousness of human beings, that's inviting us to overcome our personal darkness and to build systems and connections based on the beautiful aspects of our nature as opposed to the darker aspects of our nature, when we are culturally encouraged to focus on ourselves and our competitiveness and our darkness, our lust and our fear. We live in a culture that promotes these values. So you are right. In a sense, we have to discard the way that you did when I was asking you about Muslim dress, which you still didn't give me really the kind of answer I wanted of like, oh, why don't you wear a scarf or hijab or that kind of thing. Still would have liked a bit of a clearer answer about that.
Because it's not necessary. The fact that you think that is something that I should, or that's something that might be an obligation.
Do you even care about it? Do you care if women do or don't?
No, of course not.
It's irrelevant to you.
No, of course not. I mean, I run a magazine, where we are constantly it's set up with the purpose of showing the wide variety of Muslim experiences and Muslim women's experiences that exist in the world. And in that, we are publishing articles of women who are not just, wear hijabs, but also wear niqabs, and, women who write things that I personally disagree with. But that's the whole point. You have to allow people the full expression of what it means to be a human being to that person. And if that means having your hair out, that means having whatever type of politics, it means loving whoever that you want to love, that means all of that. It doesn't matter. Our job is to, or my job, I feel, in whatever tiny ways that I can, is to try and support people and facilitate an environment where people can flourish and be themselves as fully as possible, regardless of what that means and regardless of whether I approve of it or not and whether I think it's right or not. But I also ask for that same courtesy sort of for myself. It's why I have to qualify myself as a Muslim through having to wear a hijab or having to look like this or hold this belief or that belief is sort of irrelevant. It's I am what I am, and similarly there are it's complex. People are complicated, and we have to allow for people to be complicated. Why do we have to fit them into these nice, neat boxes just for our own satisfaction? These Nazis, I had all these opinions about them, very neat little boxes of, they're just this, they're just that, they're just this, and shouldn't they just this or that? And they don't. People have many layers to them, and to only define them by their visual or their any kind of superficial symbols, I think is reducing somebody's humanity. All the work that I do is actually about recognizing ourselves in each other. It is to try and locate the humanity in someone else, not so much to find their humanity, but it's actually in an attempt to hold on to my own.
Oh wow.
And it's and that's important. And I've said this many times, and people kind of roll their eyes at this, but I refuse, as a woman of color, as a the long laundry list of the things that I consider myself to be. I know what it feels like to be stereotyped. I know what it feels like to be dehumanized. And because of that, I refuse to do that to somebody else, even if that means a Nazi, because if I am willing to dehumanize somebody else, then there's no difference left. And that's what I'm kind of working against, is this kind of simplification of people, this kind of caricature of people for my convenience. It's not supposed to be convenient. It's supposed to just be messy and wonderful and complicated. It's supposed to just be human. And that's the battle, isn't it? The whole challenge, the whole thing is about recognizing that I can see myself in you and vice versa. And there's something in that. And once we can recognize that, it becomes harder for me to harm you and to hurt you or to exercise violence against you. And this is why, on a bigger level, why our politicians encourage us to dehumanize each other, is so that violence becomes possible. It is so that we can strip each other of our rights. It is so that we can become reduced just to a consumer or just to a voter. We're not just anything. We're not just a hijab. We're not just a woman or just, a famous guy who's trying to do a podcast. There's more to you than that. There's more to me than that. There's more to the Nazis than that. There's more to the jihadis than that. So the more we can get underneath all the noise and the kind of static to the real heart, to the real, the heartbeat of it, the closer we get to solutions. And it's, we can't afford to give up on each other, is how I feel. It's we're all in this together. And I think if we give up on each other, then we're also giving up on ourselves. And I think then we're handing over. You speak about power. You're about power. You're about power. Me too. If we do that, then we're handing over our power. And I refuse to do that. I do a lot of work with women's rights activists all around the world, and in particular with women from Muslim majority countries. And again, people in the West would constantly like to cast us as victims and as poor, pathetic women who are being abused and this, that, and the other. But what I have found amongst a lot of these women who I consider to be my mentors, who I consider to be my complete inspiration, is even in the darkest environments, they're able to hold on to light. They're able to hold on to resistance. They're able to smile. They're able to love. They're able to laugh. And they're able to just do politics times 10. And I asked one of them, Hina Jilani is her name, and I remember asking her, why are you hopeful? Why are you such an optimist? And she said, because we don't have the luxury of pessimism. And I think that's true. And to me, if women like that, in circumstances that seem impossible and odds that seem completely stacked against them, are able to hold on to their humanity, and they're constantly, some of the women that I work with are working to bring their boys back from ISIS and from various militias to try and reintegrate them back into life, and realize that jihad is not about spilling blood, it's about giving blood at a hospital. If women like this exist when they've got everything against them, then, because I asked you this, why do you do the things that you do? The reason I do it is I was lucky enough to be born in a country like Norway, and I'm lucky enough to live in a place like the UK, for all of its faults and all of its stuff. I could have been born a girl in Afghanistan. And I think with all the privilege that I have and all the advantages that I have here, surely it's part of my responsibility to do something useful with that. Otherwise, what good is it if it's just for me? If only I get to breathe and I get to be free and I get to do what I want to do, what good is it if the woman next to me is bleeding? What good is it?
So privilege, good rant. Privilege is, you see, as a duty.
It's a responsibility. You have to do something about it.
Have you any thoughts about how men and women can relate to one another more positively in this time that seems to be seeing bifurcation and polarity between the genders?
I think masculinity has to be reimagined. I think what it means to be a man, the fact that the associations to that has become about dominance and violence and power, the fact that men, some men anyway, seek their sense of self through those things. I think we have to reimagine what it means to be a man. We have to reimagine what masculinity means. And I think we have to liberate men from the very, very tiny, incredibly narrow, destructive boxes that they get to operate within. And I think we have to make it okay for men to feel things and to articulate their feelings and to say. And this is why I appreciate what you do, because again, you being in the position that you are and you being as open and willing to be vulnerable and willing to admit that, oh my goodness, you do have feelings, I think is so important for young men to see, because I think we constantly talk about women being at the receiving end of toxic masculinity, but I think toxic masculinity is also killing men. So I think we need to liberate men from that as well. So how do we do that? Is I think we have to speak about it as much as possible, and we have to make young men understand that the liberation of women is not, and feminism is not just about women. It's actually about equalizing the sort of playing field and also liberating men from this cage.
Yes, liberation for men from the
Inner
prescriptive roles that they have been granted, which ultimately I would say are roles that are prescribed by the powerful.
Exactly.
Bloody hell, you. No, so like we were meant to, I think this has gone on for substantially longer than was intended. Yeah, every so often, and I don't trouble you with this kind of detail. People would hold up like a thing saying like, oh, it's 80 minutes, it's 90 minutes now, and it continues. But I think you've done such incredible work already, and I'm fascinated to see the work that you will continue to do, and I hope that I can be of some help to you.
Does it make sense what I'm saying?
No, I think you might be mentally ill. Now,
thank you.
No, of course it makes sense what you're saying. I think
but do you believe that it's doable? Do you believe that what I'm saying, that on an individual level, is how we start? And building solidarity between people across their differences.
I think that the beginning has to be non-judgment while being personally discerning. I also believe that we have to have a relationship with the transcendent, which you seem to understand. I think that perhaps the primary problem is we define ourselves by outward and material ideals. I think that if we can start to challenge them, we can start to break down identity and reform identity. I'm not talking about some sort of post-modern nightmare where no one knows what England is anymore. No. I'm saying, as was you suggested in your very first controversial, inciting interview, that we have to reimagine states that includes all of us, the best version of all of us. And I think it's this obliteration of hope to which you continually refer that is an important factor that we need to reignite, re-endow, encourage people once more to believe in a new vision. One thing I did want to pick you up on was when you spoke about politicians and their visions, you sort of spoke of it in the abstract, and in fact your body language was you placed it over there somewhere. And I think that possibly the responsibility lies with us, that the time for abstract leadership, particularly within bodies that, as we now know, sort of operate primarily at the behest of corporate interests, with the excluding one or two notable exceptions.
I think the extremes are actually reacting to exactly what you're saying. I think the extreme, the all these kind of convulsions that we're seeing on the fringes of our societies is an actual reaction to the fact that we've been reduced down to consumers. We're being reduced down to all these incredibly dehumanizing labels. And I think their attempts are actually noble, and I kind of, it's a bit uncomfortable for me to even say this or feel this, but I think some of their intentions are actually noble.
What, in that they're fighting? You mean even extremists?
Well, yeah, and in the, that their intentions are actually about love, believe it or not. It's actually not hate that drives them. I know we keep talking about hate when we're speaking about people like that, but it's actually love and loyalty for each other and for a future that they believe is better. They don't want to. They are kind of the collateral damage of globalization. Of kind of this consumer, hyper extreme capitalist system as well. And so they're trying to create more meaning and to become powerful instead of powerless. They want to matter because they don't. And also as a culture, you have to, sort of think that the only time we reward these guys with our attention is when they do horrible things. So they matter to us when they commit crimes. Sorry, they're telling you.
That was 95 minutes, dear. That's it. We don't even have a sign for that.
Sorry.
Someone had to make a new sign. People had to amalgamate the 5 and the 90 sign. It's never been used before. We're in completely new territory. Unimagined realms. History itself's been made. But nonetheless, I just want to do these quick... Do you mind if I ask you these quick questions, which we may be able to use for clips and stuff, because they're more to do with contemporary issues. Okay, so we talked about Tommy Robinson and Asian grooming gangs, and you were extremely passionate, weren't you? That inspired one of your greater rants, one among many in the league table of Deeyah rants that I've been constructing. Is Donald Trump a real threat to Muslims and minorities in America?
Yes.
How?
Because he is dehumanizing anyone who doesn't fit into his vision of what it means to be an American and what it means to be a citizen. And I think his continuous reduction of people's humanity in this way will ultimately be a recipe for violence.
That's really good and surprisingly succinct. Is wearing a hijab or burqa anti-feminist?
I think wearing a hijab can absolutely be feminist. Burqa I have real issues with personally.
Why?
But again, I
Why,
am a feminist.
More concealing.
Well, the burqa also, I mean, very often it also includes a niqab, so it means, only your eyes showing. So I have problems with that. When it comes to hijab, I completely will support women's rights to choose that and to wear it.
So where's the line then? Where's the cut-off? It's like it's a creeping bit of fabric that's got to be stopped at a certain bit of the face, the chin, the mouth.
I think it's a matter of the creeping fabric, but I think it's also a matter of the age of the woman. I think, I don't believe in compulsory veiling for children. I think that if you are at an age where you can make an informed decision about, your politics and your body and how you manifest your feminism.
In a way, dear, we don't even think that the Nazis are making informed decisions. We think they're making misinformed decisions. We think that the jihadists are making misinformed decisions. Like, no one's making informed decisions. People are responding to stimuli that's bogus, distracting and misleading. What autonomy is there? What free will is there? What is there except abandoning fact of our individual identity at to be sacrificed at the altar of some higher ideal called love or God?
No, but I don't think that it's as fluid as that. I think, it's
I really went for it there.
But you look at Iran, compulsory veiling, it's and if a woman just lightly loosens her veil, it's a reason for her getting punished, violently or with prison sentences or with social ramifications. Same in Saudi Arabia, you cannot walk out, the kind of conduct that women are expected to participate in is incredibly reductive when it comes to their humanity. So I think it's not as fluid as that, but I do think in Western countries, with so many of my Muslim female friends who do choose to wear the hijab, I absolutely support it. I choose not to. My grandmother didn't use it. My mother doesn't use it. But a lot of other women do. They have done in the past and they will continue to in the future. And I support that. When it comes to the burqa, for me personally, not so much. If a woman sits herself down here right now and says, look, Deeyah, this is my choice. I really feel more comfortable this way. I would say, great. I will fight for your right to do so. But when it comes to 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, I'm not a fan of that. But can it be feminist? It can be. I don't particularly like... I don't know how many times I'm going to say that, but I don't particularly like the burqa, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah, you keep going on about it.
Yeah.
What about Antifa? Are Antifa as bad as the far right?
What do you mean by as bad as?
Volatile, aggressive, extremist.
I do think that aspects of the Antifa are becoming... I think there's a co-radicalization going on. I think the extreme right and the extreme left are kind of feeding off each other, and I do think that and again, I think masculinity comes here more than anything else. I think in the attempt to outdo the other end of the spectrum, I think both sides are becoming more and more willing to relegate their political views to violent expression, which I disagree with, regardless of which side it comes from. But obviously, my political leaning is on the left anyway. So I mean, I've been a part of kind of the Antifa protests in my own life.
And you got that spray.
Yeah, I did.
When you were used to be a Nazi.
When I
remember that holiday?
Yeah, I remember that one. Are they as bad as each other? I think it depends on their behavior. I don't agree with violence, no matter who perpetrates it.
It's good to have some general principles like that, isn't it? Let's not have violence. Yeah. Let's let people express their individuality and up to harming others.
Yeah.
Consent. Just basic ideas, right?
Exactly.
There are some general principles that we can have. What's that thing I wanted to
what's
ask
that?
you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And what's the label saying? How have we surpassed our...
Well, people are just setting fire to stuff out there now.
They've gone. Yeah, they're just going to...
It's just you and I. People aren't even recording this. We're having this conversation in an abyss.
Exactly.
Hey, this is the thing. say when I chatted to Jordan Peterson, and he says that much of the rise of the current wave of feminism and the anger inhered within it is in accordance with a archetype known as I can't remember the exact sort of the exact archetype. He was saying that it's in accordance with an idea of that sort of a negative female energy, like the devouring mother. That what we protest against is the sort of like, that there's the possibility for the positive male, the benevolent king, the cruel king, the benevolent mother, the cruel mother. That we are experiencing. Not, people talk a lot about toxic masculinity. What about toxic femininity? That's a more succinct way of saying that.
There is such a thing?
Minutes. Yeah, do you think so? Toxic femininity? Yeah, that's my question.
I mean, I don't know how that manifests itself. I don't know how we're seeing that.
Rage against the patriarchy, in inverted commas.
But how is that toxic? I mean, it's if you are on the receiving end of persecution, abuse, violence, oppression for centuries, then if women dare to be angry for once and not fill the prescribed boxes of be a good girl,
I think I've got something
be
good
obedient, here. be a good girl, don't react, be polite. If women for once get angry at being cut, at being brutalized, then that's toxic.
I agree with you. It's only hypothetical.
Yeah.
But what about a minute ago when you just said with Muslims, we can't have one category that is Muslim with 1.5 billion people. The need to verify the feminism is that there is such a thing as a woman and that there is such a thing as female oppression. Couldn't we similarly regard oppression as happening at the level of economics, of underclasses that occurs regardless of gender?
Well, but it happens because of gender. It happens, but there are multiple layers of oppression, though. There's not one. Women don't experience oppression just because of their gender. Women also have class. Women also have race. All these other markers aren't just the luxury of men or just the identifiers of men. They're also identifiers of women. So women experience all the layers of oppression that, for example, a working class woman experiences all the same forms of oppression that a working class man does, but she has one added form of oppression which also is assigned to her gender. So a woman can be standing out in the streets of or Tahrir Square in Egypt, right, fighting against the oppressor, against Mubarak at the time, the Arab Spring, when that was going on. She can be standing shoulder to shoulder with her male. They were demanding for freedom and liberty and dignity and bread and various other things. But that woman also has the added pressure of being oppressed and abused potentially by her father, brother, husband, partner, that the man doesn't. I also work a lot with artistic freedom and artists who are persecuted and imprisoned and tortured and censored for various reasons. Women experience all the same things as their male counterparts. Female journalists experience the same thing as their male counterparts, with the added layer of abuse that comes with the fact that you're a woman. I understand this Jordan Peterson thing. I actually only got familiar with him through your work. Yeah. People kept mentioning his name. I'm still not that familiar with him. I appreciate the fact that he is trying to speak to something in men who are really struggling and are really searching for something. I really appreciate that, and I think it's really important that somebody speak to that. However, I don't think that needs to be at the expense of women and at the expense of women getting to manifest their full humanity. It doesn't have to be either or. That's what I reject.
I agree with you, but perhaps then we shouldn't be opposing those arguments by using its binary opposite. Perhaps we should be continually rejecting those terms, those labels.
What labels?
Female. Male. I'm not suggesting that we become some kind of mist of beingness, but like
we could just be human.
We can.
I agree with you. But I think we can try to aspire to the label of human, but the reason these labels matter in the process of getting to that place is until oppression and violence and abuse of women stops in the name of their gender, in the name of because you are a woman, you are less than. Until that stops, we don't get to the category of we are all human. All women want, all feminism is about. It's not anti-male. It's not we want men to have less rights, or we want now it's the time of women, and we want women to men to take a back seat. It is about liberating us all to just be
but
human.
When you speak on behalf of a kind of spiritual progressivism, you speak as an individual. When you speak in terms of gender, you speak as if feminism is one unit, when I imagine there are possibly different types of feminism.
No, it is different. No. I don't speak of it as a unit. I speak more as the general experiences of women across the world, having done the work that I've done. And of course, I can only be in contact with so many people personally. But in the contact that I have had, it is absolutely undeniable that women are suffering in so many different contexts around the world, whether it comes to equal pay, whether it comes to equal protection under the law, whether it comes to protection from violence, whether it comes from their just basic dignity and human rights.
When something is as expansive and as global as that, how can, like obviously I'm a man, but my sort of most important relationships in my life are with women. They're all of the, I obviously have a vested interest in the people I love most, living in a fair and equal society. Now, presumably, I'm not particularly unique among men.
You're not.
Other than the charisma and the eyebrows, let's not rule them out. But in loads of ways, my priorities would be the people I love, and the people I love are women.
And this is where I do have arguments with my feminist friends who basically say, some of them do say, men are kind of a lost cause, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So
there are different types of feminism.
No, I'm not saying that there aren't. To me, the goal is that we all get to a place where we are just human.
That's got to be the goal.
That is the goal. That absolutely is the goal. And that is also the goal of a lot of feminists. Maybe not all, but a lot of feminists, including myself.
But you, as a woman, believe that one of the areas that most needs to be addressed is gender inequality. And then I, as a man, believe, for some quirky biographical reason, think it's to do with class and oppression that happens in early life.
No, but I don't believe that it's just got to do with gender. I believe that it's got to do with gender, class, race. It's got to do with all of it. Yes. That's the difference. I'm saying that gender is one more layer of identity, or one more layer of the experience of being a human being that defines what that experience is for an individual, for a human in the time that we have here. So I'm not saying that it's not class, not race, not all of this. It absolutely is. But one more experience is also gender. And I also want to say that you being a man, and like you just said, your closest relationships or kind of investments in human beings are actually with a lot of women. I think where a lot of feminists are struggling, or where we need to do better, I don't really like a group thing anyway, but there you go. If we have to speak in those terms, I think where feminists could do better is to understand that we are only going to win these battles shoulder to shoulder. Yes. It has to be man and women together. It cannot be women will win this battle and men will win this battle and then we'll somehow figure it out together. We have to fight together. But you tell me, how do we involve more men? When I've been to conferences and conversations or whatever about violence against women, the entire room is filled with women. The perpetrator is male. So where's the guy?
I reckon it's by, like when we talked about James Baldwin a minute ago, but it's by reconciling that identity is non-binary, a sort of a modern gender politics idea, that within that you have to liberate the femaleness that is almost like in a kind of internal Brexit, while 51% want to leave, 49% want to stay. Any man is almost female, that we are closer to reject these terms, to liberate the female within yourself, to acknowledge that women are the most important people probably in your own life, and to not to commodify and objectify other human beings, and to look at your own life and see where you do that, and see and be willing to change. A lot of people aren't willing to change. I think you can deal with anyone who's willing to change, who hasn't ossified into a belief system that they use instead of an identity. But I think that means that both sides of the argument have to, as you said, be willing to stand shoulder to shoulder, willing to reconcile, willing to have a shared vision that's about creating an ideal as opposed to venting rage.
And I mean, ultimately, the goal, like we said, it is about how do we ensure that people's full humanity and whatever their dreams and their hopes and their loves and whatever their vision of themselves and their future is, that gets to manifest itself in its full, flourishing, positive, wonderful glory. And how do we do that together? How do we do that without demeaning each other? And to me, the answer, sort of in my kind of personal sort of small life, has been empathy. Empathy is kind of one of the most important tools and one of the most instruments, I think, that we have available to us, that we need to deploy in that. And there, within that, it's about stories. How do we tell stories in a way that we see ourselves in each other, where we recognize our humanity in each other, where we make it possible for a disenfranchised man to recognize what it might be like to be a woman who is experiencing violence, and vice versa, and how do we, and also for us to recognize that a lot of these barriers are sort of barriers and divisions, these walls. I mean, Trump keeps talking about building a physical wall.
So odd, isn't it, that? It's an amazing metaphor.
But he's been so successful at building walls between us as human beings already. That wall the physical wall doesn't exist. He's already being successful in that. So how do we break down those walls? How do we create a more plural, inclusive future?
You're an incredible person. I think
Likewise.
that what you are doing by placing yourself among the people that you would have the most obvious conflict is a brilliant way of metabolizing our potential to transcend those barriers and boundaries and create connections, and ultimately having the optimistic perspective that you clearly have, that love is more powerful than hate, that we will get there, that you will never undo hatred with more hatred, and that we have to continually reach out in love to the people that we have opposed, and certainly those that oppose us.
We have to.
Deeyah, wow, what an incredible conversation that is. I feel a little bit like I've taken word drugs.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for watching this podcast and going all the way to the end of it. Would you so kind as to click the bell, might not be there because we're over there, and subscribing so that we can infiltrate your serenity and peace of mind with jangling bells and buzzes. Thank you.